Hello, hello. Welcome back to season 3 of Detection at Scale. Today, we're here with Matthew Martin, who is the founder of Two Candlesticks, and we're really excited to have a conversation.
I'm doing great, Zach, man. Glad to be here.
So we were having a little conversation before we hit record, and one of the things that you mentioned that I thought was really interesting was about how you're working with smaller companies using AI to enable their security operations. So maybe you could kind of talk about that and also talk about what it is that you're working on with Two Candlesticks.
Yeah, so just a little bit about Two Candlesticks. So we're a full service cybersecurity consulting firm. We focus a lot on small, medium sized companies. We also do a lot of work with emerging markets. So a ton of work in Africa, where we work with some of the companies there, but also the actual countries and some of their like data protection offices and sort of helping them with regulations and guides and things like that. So kind of all over the world, trying to help get security up so around so people can actually address the risks they're seeing. And so part of that is when we work with these companies that don't have the budgets of, the big like Fortune 100 firms, right? And so they're trying to figure out how do we do this? And one of the ways is with technology like generative AI, which allows us to become way more efficient with our resources. And so one of the cool ways that we're helping is, and I think every SOC manager would experience this no matter what size you are, when somebody in your organization has an issue, whether they've seen a fish come in or they've accidentally clicked something or they sent something to the wrong person, whatever it is, the sort of historical path forward is you call the security hotline or you email in the security mailbox, and then some security analyst will reach out, have like a little interview, figure out what happened. Was it real? Was it just spam? Whatever. And then you go through that process of creating a ticket and then, the normal sort of process, right? By using generative AI now, we can go and create a chatbot in whatever their messaging system is, whether it's Slack or Teams or whatever, to where now the employee can go and just have a communication through Slack with the bot to, hey, I had an incident. That bot will then go and ask all those contextual questions of trying to figure out if it's real or not. And that will get rid of a lot of the false positives because we can sort of figure it out. But what it's really handy for is that it will get all that information and then go create a ticket in something like ServiceNow. The security responder can now go look at that and they have all the information they need from the start to go work on it. Right. And so the nice thing for the end user and for the security analyst is if they want to get an update on it, they can just ping the bot and just put, hey, where's the status of this ticket? It's going to tell them. So the security analyst isn't getting inundated with like trying to update things and all that. Well, what I've found is in general, a solution like this will save somewhere around 45 minutes per incident, per reporting of an incident for the analyst. So, for whatever size organization you are, you can sort of extrapolate that out. Like, how much time would you save by, implementing a bot like this? And I know there's a few, big banks that are already doing this. I've talked to their CISOs about it. It's super helpful. But now your analysts, instead of having to do that sort of level one work, they can actually go work on the instance, and you're able to handle more. You're more efficient. And so that's a simple way where it's not really, having AI integrated into your SIEM or whatever. It's more of just using it as for workflow processes. But you're able to now repurpose your resources, and instead of having to go hire somebody new, you're able just to be more efficient, which is a great way to use the technology. And it also doesn't expose us to a lot of the concerns we have around things like hallucinations and stuff by putting it into the real security tools. So it's a nice like stepping stone into that world.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to pick your brain on is the area of risk and the area where things can go wrong. Because we all love to talk about the potential, and I'm certainly included in that. I love being optimistic about AI, but I would love to hear your perspective on someone who's implemented this in a lot of different types of companies. Where have been the areas that you've seen risk or you've seen challenges with implementing AI in SOC?
Well, some of the biggest challenges are not technical. Some of the biggest challenges are sort of political, and it's within the organization who owns AI and who's determining the prioritization of the sort of AI spends throughout the company. And where I see a lot of the problems, so security teams trying to do it, is that there's definitely a want from the company to do it, but they don't know who should own it as an overall sort of process, right? And so what happens is you end up with a big budget of money that just sits there because they can't decide where they should go spend it. And it causes a lot of frustration. And what you end up with is like shadow AI, where people start to do this stuff, on their own, which one, the SOC team's not getting the sort of prioritization they want, but now they also have to start chasing down where everybody else is starting to use this. So I actually think that's probably the biggest problem that a lot of people have with trying to implement it. Next up, I think, is just the data, understanding where all the data is and is the data actually clean. In my experience, it's very rare that I go into any company of any size where the data is in a, I would say, good place. Like if you talk to somebody in any organization who's experienced with trying to do this, like the sort of manual correlation of data that we've all done for decades, right? We all complain about the data quality. It's, you got data all over the place. We don't actually know where it is or who's maintaining it, who's making sure that it's accurate and that we feel good about it. And so there's always a sort of data problem. And so before you can really go all in on sort of AI, you've got to spend time making sure that you actually understand those data sources, they're cleaned up, there's governance around them, that you can trust them. And then from a security perspective, you have to then put in the controls to protect them appropriately, right? So understanding where all that pieces of data are, and that you have, then once you do all that, then you're in a place where you can actually kind of start developing the AI because you can trust what you're putting into it.
What is like your minimum bar for data quality? Like, how would you describe that?
A lot of that depends on what it is you're trying to do. Right. So, to give you an example, so like, for example, if I'm doing some like chatbot where it's just going out and grabbing a piece of information, bringing it back, right? So it's, if I think of it like I talked about earlier, where it's like, give me a status of this ticket and bring it back. I'm less concerned around all of that because it's pretty simple versus if I'm trying to use it to rebalance the stock portfolio, right? Or if I'm using it to do how it's described. But if I'm using it to make decisions, like if I'm having it go, is this incident worthy of whatever, like triggering this event? If it's autonomously making decisions, then the data quality bar is way higher than just grabbing information and bringing it back. So it's hard. It's really hard to answer that in one simple way, but it's more of what I would say to anybody listening is it's about really understanding what you're trying to do with it. Just kind of think about how we do with security controls in general, right? We typically think about what's our risk tolerance, and then we design controls around it. It's the same thing, right? So we're saying, what is our risk tolerance of this AI capability? Does it need to be, you know, 5 nines uptime and accuracy, or is it okay if it is not always there? Is 90% accuracy okay? And that depends on what it is you're doing with it. And so I think that's where you kind of have to do that assessment up front. You have to kind of think about like what is it you're okay with, and a lot of this we already have in place. If you think about like machine learning and other aspects of data science, it's the same things we've always done. It's just a new tool to do it.
I think it's interesting to think about the bar for reliability with AI. My personal opinion is that AI actually has a much higher bar than traditional tooling. I can probably guarantee that most security teams are not looking at a efficacy percentage of their rules, for example. I don't think they're saying, "Oh, our rules are hitting at 80%. We want it at 90%." They have a different trust level, I think, over the years. But for whatever reason, when AI or as AI has become more prominent in security operations, I think the bar is a lot higher. Do you get the same impression?
I think that's true when you're talking about decision making. So if you think about like traditionally we had like rule based things, right? So like DLP or whatever, you still had a human looking at it, right? So you have the rule that would trigger it and say, you should go look at this. Like I remember getting started in security, and like one of my first jobs was pouring through Vontu incidents, and it was a nightmare. Like, it's just endless amounts of DLP incidents, and there were so many false positives, so many ones that you're just looking at and going, oh, that's just not a big deal. So you always have that human over top of it. So when you were looking at the accuracy, you were more thinking about the accuracy as a way to free up time of your analysts, because now they don't have to look as many false positives and that sort of thing, right?
That makes total sense, by the way.
Yeah, AI is the other way, right? Because now with AI, we're saying, "Hey, go make this decision for me." It's a whole different thing. But it's a fair point that like we've never really measured our analysts and said like, all right, well, if I have a team of 5 analysts and they're making decisions, which ones are more accurate? We've never done that before. Maybe we should have been, but we just never really did it.
Well, I think in general, security metrics are a thing that most teams aspire to, but not many do in reality, probably because of the reason you mentioned around data quality. It actually just might be really hard to get
Yeah.
access to that data, which is probably the root cause of most of it.
Yeah, I mean, I've tried building metrics programs my entire career. It's, from where I started, it's very hard to get the data, and then once you do get the data, it's a mess. It's just a lot of cleanup, and I, as security teams, we have so many other things to do. Like just creating metrics is pretty low on the totem pole, but it is important. But I think that's why you get that feeling, right? Of like, man, why do we have such a higher bar for AI? Well, it's because we want them to make decisions.
That makes total sense. I think that's a really smart way to think about it, actually. The stakes become higher because the job has become much broader in scope. So when you talk about the decision making needing to be as accurate as possible, what have you seen as effective in improving the decision making of agentic AI? Is it certain context? Is it certain data about the organization? Like, what have you seen there?
I think where I've seen the best ones is more about how they approach it. And what I mean by that is when they're focused on the results being auditable and explainable, then they
Hmm.
put the right processes around it to understand it. And so I always try to tell people just start off with that. If anything you're going to use with AI, can I explain why it made the decision it did? And can I submit evidence to an internal audit team to say, this is what happened? And they can go in and audit it and see if it's doing what it's supposed to do. So building it with that transparency is what allows them to be more accurate, because now they're being held accountable. And I think there's a lot of situations where, I don't know if we're just in a hurry or, historically security's not been the greatest about explaining things, but I think that's something we got to get better at, is especially with AI, because if not, we get into a world of trouble. And, I know there's a lot of historical precedent for why it's important. And you think back to like the Apple Card when it first came out, there wasn't a lot of explanation around why it was making decisions. And I don't know if you know the story, but when it first came out, they didn't ask you whether you were male or female in the application at all, right? But then they get hit with a huge lawsuit because a wife and a husband applied at the same time, and everything was shared. It was the same income, the same debts, same credit scores, same everything. But the AI was able to figure out who was the female and who was the male, and they got different balances
Oh my God.
because
That's
it was
crazy.
able to use all the other information that it could find about those people to determine, oh, this is a female, this is a male. And I think that's a fascinating story, but it also shows us like we have to be able to see that. We have to understand, okay, why did it make this decision? And then we can go back and make it more accurate, or we can take that out. Now, the other thing that gets interesting, and this gets controversial, is like, well, should it be? Right. So, like, if there's a piece of data, if you're truly going to test AI or trust AI to make decisions, it's going to see it differently than how we do as humans. It's going to see it differently than what's conventional wisdom of how to make decisions. It's not going to think about like there should be no discrimination, no biases, whatever. You have to train that, right? So, but the interesting part of trying to make these decisions sometimes is, do you want to limit it? Do you not? And that's sort of the balance that you have to find. And that's why that transparency is so important, because you want to be able to go tell somebody, here, this is how we're making decisions, and these are the things we're controlling for, and we're letting it kind of go in these other places. Because that way, when your board looks at it, your internal audit looks at it, your regulator looks at it, they can come in and say, okay, I get it, but like you can't do that. Right? You need to change that or whatever. But that's the sort of iterative process. Well, I'm huge on transparency and the sort of, like I said, the explainability and the auditability of the whole thing.
Have you kept up with the recent Claude model? Have you
Yeah,
seen that?
yeah.
Do you think the extended thinking mode is kind of in line with what you're saying, being able to audit how decisions are getting made by AI?
Yeah, I don't want to give a complete 100% answer because I haven't played with it enough to know, but I think it's in the right direction. And I think a lot of these places, all of them are starting to sort of feel that. And yeah, I think that's the way forward. We'll see if they get there, how close they can get there. But I think that's the right path.
It's certainly a good path so far. I've had a chance to play with it, and in a lot of ways, it's just automating what we were doing in prompts before, which is a chain of thought, right? Think step by step, explain your thinking, wrap your thinking in these tags so we can automate it and audit it. And it's what you see with models like Grok 3. It's what you see with the O series by OpenAI, and obviously DeepSeek being the more prominent one that sort of spawned kind of like the popular rise of the reasoning models. So the reasoning models will be really interesting for security, definitely. I think that's a really interesting call out.
All of those you just mentioned, like it is going to be fascinating to me how that changes how we think about third party security because all of our vendors are going to be using them. And so
Mm.
understanding which ones your vendors are using and then being able to kind of understand how your data is being used by those different models is fascinating to me. That's a whole kind of different thing, but like just stream of consciousness, right? It's an interesting thought to me is how that starts to change the way we think about our supply chains and our data flows with our partners.
Well, how does it change it? I mean, I assume the privacy and like the processing, auditing, things like that. I mean, talk us through like what do you think's coming there, and what do you think? How do you think vendors should be thinking about it?
Yeah, so you think about the way third party security is done today. It's mostly a questionnaire. You're going to use maybe some third party tool to do a scan to get an idea, right? Like a security scorecard or something like that. But there hasn't been that much attention paid to where the data actually goes into. Like we know, like if I have a partner that does something for me, right, and I send them a piece of my data so they can do what they need to do to it, send it back. We know the controls they have in place there because we do a questionnaire, our assessment, whatever. So we know the general controls there. But now when they start putting it into different AI models, where does that go? Right. And what kind of models are they using? The thing that we tend to like assume that like most companies are big and they have security programs and they're going to use enterprise grade everything, but that's not what actually happens in the real world, right? Because there's a lot of smaller companies that we end up partnering with. And you would be absolutely amazed at how many of them just use free versions of stuff. And so when you start thinking about things like DeepSeek or whatever that are in China, right now, like how many of your vendors are using it? And now is your data sitting over in China? And how are they doing that? Right. I'm not saying DeepSeek's bad. Don't get me wrong. But like the point is like it's questions that you have to start asking. Like I remember a couple of years ago, we just started saying, "Are you using AI?" Like that was a general question we started asking for our third parties. Before that, we never even asked that question. Probably, I would say probably in the last 2 or 3 years, it started coming back as a new question that you put on a questionnaire. Are you using it? Just so you know. But now the question is going to become not only are you using it, because we're going to assume everybody's using it, but how are you using it? What models are you using? And then that's going to drive a whole different level of questioning, which I actually is a really good thing because it's going to help us get a way better understanding of where our data is. I think historically, we haven't done a good job of understanding the sort of the holistic flow of our data and where it goes throughout our vendor ecosystem. And these kind of questions that we have to start asking will help us sort of map that out. And so I think it's a pretty interesting future within the security teams of the evolution of really understanding your supply chain security.
And even in the greater architecture of an LM application, data could go to a lot of different places. So it's not really just the request to the foundation model and back. There's all these other intermediary steps that we take now, things like RAG, right? I wrote a blog post on detection at scale. It's a Substack as well as a podcast. And one of the things I was talking about this week is organizational context.
Mhm.
And that's also an area you probably want to audit, right? It's like if I'm uploading my policies or I'm uploading where our secret, crown jewels are, I want to know that that's safe
Yeah,
because that's very valuable context
yeah,
to an attacker.
yeah, absolutely.
But the beauty with the ecosystem in AI is that there's so much open source,
Mhm.
and that's a great thing for security for a lot of reasons, right? Like you don't have to rely on hitting a service. You can host the model locally. And there's a lot of great companies that are doing this now. So, I think that's going to be really positive for security. And also, as the models become more advanced, you likely don't need as many hops in between the what the user is trying to do and the foundation model, because for really large context windows, you can just solve it by hitting the foundation model directly. So the simplification of that architecture will sort of evolve over time as the foundation models become better. So that's also good for security.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of positive coming. It's just, are people going to be ready for it and are thinking about it the right way? Which is why it's great when you have people like yourself talking about it and writing about it. And the more people listening and being prepared, the better. Because I do think the landscape's changing. Like, how you did security 5 years ago isn't going to work in 5 years. You're already seeing it now. Like a lot of the role based stuff that we used before is completely obsolete already.
But I really like the what we were talking about earlier, where the rules, it's kind of the first layer of signal. And then you have your analysts. I'm very optimistic that AI is going to replace that framework of like, oh, signal happened, I have to look at it. And I say that purely because I just know that AI is better at picking apart details than I am.
Yeah,
And
much
I've seen it so many times, right? Like, and you know, I was an analyst for a long time. I was an engineer for a long time, and it's just the human brain gets distracted very easily, and it can't hold a lot of context all at once. And these are the things that AI and machines are great at. So why
better.
wouldn't we embrace
It
it?
doesn't get tired. It doesn't get sleepy.
Hmm.
All those different things. It's not going to have these emotions where one day you're better than the other one, and it's. I think you're completely right. That my hope is that happens. My concern with that happening is how do we train our new generation of security people, because that's typically how we all got into it, right? And we all learned how this stuff works was by doing these sort of basic things over and over and over again. So I'm a little bit concerned. Like, what's the way? Let's just play this out, right? Let's assume that AI does come in and just replaces all your sort of entry level analysts. Where do they go when they come out of college? Like, what role do they go into? That's a little bit more of a longer term thing, but I think we have to start thinking about it. Is how do we train that next generation when they're not doing these sort of entry level alert work?
A lot of what's resonating in the community is this idea of AI working alongside the analyst. So we're saying that first sort of tier one, is this something we need to care about? Like, I still believe absolutely that should be done by AI. However, the analyst should approve it. So it's really checking and saying, okay, the AI did the right thing. It found the things that we need because we understand our environment pretty well, or because we have certain needs to protect the business. And that's a little bit harder to codify. So where my mind goes is I think these analysts should learn how LLMs work, and not so much from an engineering perspective, but literally just from a prompting perspective. So, what happens if I tell the AI this type of context? How does it
Right.
behave? And just I think starting to learn the nuance of prompt engineering, like that, I think is something anyone technical should be learning right now, regardless of what vertical you're in.
Yeah, I think if you're not learning how to do prompt engineering, you're going to be way behind very quickly. This it's fascinating to me. I was talking to somebody else the other day about this, and we kind of talk about how. So I heard somebody say this one time that Claude or ChatGPT, pick whatever, is a better CISO or knows more than any other CISO. Yeah, I've heard somebody say this before. And when you think about just the knowledge, I don't disagree with them. Like, I, Claude is going to know more about security than I ever will. Like, there's just no way that I can learn as much as Claude knows. But how to actually use it is a whole different thing. Like how to actually make decisions, like you said, with business context and understanding the sort of nuances of things is a whole different world. I think you've hit on something really important. Is like when you are a security expert who actually understands prompt engineering, then and only then do you truly get the power of it out. Right? Because if you don't actually know how to prompt it very well, you're not going to get very good answers. Right. And so, but once you know like what you're doing, like when you truly an expert starts doing the prompting, then the results are incredible.
And in a lot of ways, you're translating your security knowledge into something that can kind of supercharge it. There's an ad that Anthropic put out, Claude, and it's like a jetpack for your thoughts. And I see it in the SFO all the time. And I think it's a great billboard because I understand what Claude does. I
Yeah.
think for someone who doesn't know what Claude is, they're probably like, I don't get it. But for people who are in the space, I think it's brilliant marketing because it really does do that.
It really does. Like I know for me, it's like it would make it hard, much harder for me to run my company without it. It saves me from having to hire a few people because I can use it to do various things that save me tons and tons of time. Just normal business stuff, marketing and communication stuff. And like I actually use it to help me write risk assessments, which is incredible. Like they come out and they're so good. They're better than any analyst I could go hire to write them. It's really, really good stuff.
I think to kind of put a bow on this, I would love to get your three pieces of advice for, maybe it's like security leaders who are starting their program today, because I feel like that tends to be the style of work that you compel others to work with you on.
I think the number one piece of advice I'd give to any security leader, doesn't matter if you're starting a program or not, is learn your business. Like nothing else matters if you don't understand how your company makes money. Like that's you have to be able to do that. You have to be able to because that's how you're going to build your controls. I think this the second thing I would say is like what we were talking about earlier. Really spend time understanding the new technologies. Like so, right now the new technology is generative AI, and how's it gonna help you? Because there's a recent survey I saw. Osterman Research came out with it, and they interviewed like 125 security leaders, and 10%, which it's kind of a low number, but to me it sounds outrageously high. 10% say would never trust AI. And it blew my mind. So there's like 12, 13, CISOs out of this 125 that just won't touch it. And I'm just like, you're never going to be an effective security leader if you won't even, right now you're saying not trusting it. So I think being able to learn, constantly learn, and whatever that new technology is part of the second one. And then the third one, I'm gonna actually go in that same survey. There was a line, and I actually wrote an article about this on LinkedIn last week. There was another line in that survey where it said 80% of those 125 said that they thought AI was going to help reduce burnout and security. And it hit me in a funny way, man, because we as security leaders have to stop thinking about technology as a solution to everything. If you're looking at AI as something that's going to solve a people problem, it's not. But there's tons of studies out there that show that when you implement technology without truly understanding it, you just increase complexity and stress. And so, and then when you sort of add that on, the fact that 10% of them don't even trust it, there's no way that all of them really understand enough. The way to solve this, you got to understand your people as a leader. You have to be able to kind of understand where your burnout points coming from, where people are getting overworked. Yes, you can use AI appropriately to sort of make people more efficient, which is going to lower the stress and allow them to not work 80 hours a week, right? But only if you don't add in 20 hours or more work that they just saved by AI, right? So it's a but you're not going to know that unless you know where they're at a human level. And so I think that's probably the third thing I would say to leaders is like understand your people, like have that level of empathy of what they're going through, which means that you need to understand what everybody on your team does and understand them as people. Don't fall into the trap of like we just need new technology. We just need to do things a little bit more efficient. Like that's not the answer. The answer is connection, human connection.
I've never thought of that. That was actually really that was awesome. I really appreciate that. Because burnout, yeah, you're right. Burnout can sort of pop up in a lot of different ways. And you should really think about the person, the job, sort of everything holistically. Even your own leadership style could really play a lot into burnout. Burnout isn't just you have a lot of work to do, it's how you go about handling that. So I think that was a really good point.
Exactly.
Well, awesome, Matthew. It was great having you on. This was an awesome conversation. To read longer form blog posts, go to detectionscl.com. And Matthew, anything to plug about what's going on in Two Candlesticks world?
Yeah. So one thing I'm trying to do, so this is kind of a shot in the dark if somebody out here is listening, right? I'm very passionate about Africa. And if you follow me on LinkedIn or anything, you're going to see me writing about it, talking about it pretty good bit. One of the things I discovered, I was there, a year and a half ago in Ghana, and I was talking to some people there. One of the biggest problems the continent has is they don't teach cybersecurity through the university systems. It's like a lot of Ghana, for example, there's not a single university in the entire country that has a cybersecurity program. And so what ends up happening is this is extrapolates around the continent. They're not generating enough cybersecurity professionals to actually work in the companies there. And if they do happen to get one, then they just like leave and go to Canada because they're going to make a whole lot more money, right? And better quality of life, et cetera. What I'm trying to set up is build some education programs to serve the youth in Africa. And I'm looking for places to partner with here in the US or UK to help do that. So I'm just going to plug that. Like if somebody out there wants to get involved, it's not a make money ploy. This is we want to give back and say, help the world a little bit. I'd love for somebody to reach out and let's start building it and make something happen there.
What's the best way to reach you?
Best way is email Matthew Martin at two-candlesticks.com or reach out on LinkedIn. I'm very active on there. Love to have any conversations, any questions or whatever.
Awesome. I appreciate that plug. Thanks for coming on, Matthew. It's awesome to see you again and have a little conversation. And yeah, keep in touch.
I appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me.
All right. See y'all soon.